Are you listening?
This is the Rob Scott Show.
Damn.
I mean, really, like, if we're not trying to change the world, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Rob Scott Show. This is Rob. I'm here with Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, it's great to be back with you again, Rob.
Me too. It's good to be here. What do you want to get into today?
Well, I thought we should celebrate that we're on episode 40 of the Rob Scott Show, which is 40 episodes longer than I've ever recorded a podcast for.
That is very, very good. Yeah, that's amazing. I love it. Big round number. That's good. We should celebrate like every 10 or something and give ourselves a little pat on the back.
There you go. I like
awesome.
that.
So yeah, nice.
But yeah, I thought we could do episode 40 on something that I really like. Just to, I don't know, because I get to pick. So
yeah.
But yeah, I would like kind of to get into the being side of this being and doing that we're trying to help other people do better and talk about duality and non-duality today.
So I love that. Yeah. So I love how you sort of wrap that up into the being part of this. I think it's really helpful to think about how many times we feel as though what we're thinking we want to be is more accomplished and a better doer and all these things. But there's this whole other side that's really outside of time, that's just in this moment, which is just being, right? And we joke about that sometimes going, hey, we're not humans doing, we're humans being, human beings, right? And we're just kind of bad at being. Like many of us have let that atrophy. And what I mean by that is we're constantly modeling time and thinking of time. And we end up with this sense of, I'm not there yet. I need to get somewhere else. There'll be somewhere better than this. And so, I call that stuck on the treadmill of time or lost in time or lost in thought. And a shortcut out of that is to be present differently, actually put down modeling and come into this moment, right? Actually leave the modeling of time and be more present in being. And then one really important distinction of that is something called non-duality, which is, people may have heard of that or may have not heard of that, but we should understand what the difference is between duality and non-duality. And I think that the way that we talk about that and we teach that is often much simpler than how a lot of other people think about it.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So I don't know what was the laugh? Is that?
Well, I was just thinking, I really like how we unfold the kind of this roadmap of helping our listeners understand themselves and what they want and what their problems are in like a more clear way.
Yeah.
And so we've talked recently on the podcast a lot about meaning and thinking and kind of the mechanisms that are going on there. And I think the reason that I really like the being side, the duality, non-duality, which we should definitely define clearly, is that it's kind of the mechanism to get the feeling outcomes, right? So we want like the $1 million, but what we want is the ability to be the person that can make the $1 million and do all the habits. We also like on the doing side, on the being side, we want to feel happy, right? So we want that kind of ability to access that happiness, right? We don't want to be like eternally happy or eternally in doing or any of these things. And I think kind of the magic of the fundamental shift, or not magic, but kind of the benefits of the fundamental shift, a lot can be realized in understanding at least how we talk about duality and non-duality and kind of playing with it. So, and I was like chuckling because you're like, we define it pretty simply. And I do agree with you. I do think we define it simply, which I don't always think all of our definitions are simple. And this one is definitely one I think is manageable for someone who's maybe never heard of this before.
Yeah. And I think just to make another argument for being, in a sense, it's almost as if, let's just make it about money. We'd love to make more money or whatever. A huge sad story would be if you made all the money that you wanted to make, but you were still incapable of being satisfied or being happy, right? So you can accomplish all the goals, but if you haven't developed an appreciation muscle, literally a way to be in the moment and really happy with what's going on. And it doesn't have to be happy, like ha ha ha, laughing or whatever. It could just be at peace or satisfied or full of joy or whatever. then it doesn't matter what happens, right? If you're clinically depressed and we add $1 billion to your bank account, and that doesn't change your clinical depression at all, right? If that doesn't move the needle for what your experience is internally, then who cares, right? It's
totally.
And so of course we want the external things, but we have to be really honest that in most cases we want those because we're actually going after trying to feel differently about ourselves or have a different story about ourselves or want, some change in mechanism there. So a great shortcut is to realize that you can have a lot more volume turn up on your happiness without changing any of those other things, right? The short path is to actually just learn how to get better at feeling better, being happier, being more present, being more confident, being more whatever. And that actually turns you into the kind of person that then is actually better at doing, so it's kind of the reverse way to quote unquote get there, is realize it's not a there we're trying to get to. It's actually, we're trying to get here, happy, arrived, okay, and kind of in love with ourselves and in love with the moment and in love with life. And so, yeah,
and that's just like, I was just going to say, that's kind of just another example of why the fundamental shift just kind of is the gift that keeps on giving, because the skill of getting better at doing is enhanced by getting better at being.
Yes.
And often, again, if you look at different skills, the more you kind of hone in on one skill, the more the other atrophies because you're paying attention to something different and getting mastery over something else. And this really does work in combination. And I think I would say, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say kind of the skill of being is the one that's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck overall, because it's going to kind of solidify who you are and also help you with the doing, versus you get really good at doing, but to your point, if you don't have the ability to appreciate it or find joy in it once you kind of do hit those milestone achievements, then it's going to feel empty, right? So this is kind of the big guy.
Yeah, it really is the big guy. And the other thing too is that any actual doing that has to happen in this moment. And so what we're often doing is we're modeling the future. We're thinking about how we should be every day. What are the habits I'm supposed to, how am I supposed to eat? What kind of sales calls am I supposed to make? We're lost in modeling a fake future that's not the real future. It's just our idea of it. Then we judge ourselves against that. Oh, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, so I'm bad or not good or whatever. And the only place we actually have agency to do anything is this moment. So when we're present, right, it's not about modeling some future behavior of next Tuesday. It's actually about, like, are you doing the thing that you need to be doing now? Are you capable of stopping doing and really appreciating now? Can you then make a decision to actually plan meaningfully now? Can you then go, okay, I'm done planning, I actually have to do now, right? And so it's this constant management of this ever-changing moment of now that's actually much more honest and real. Like, that's really what's on the table. And if you ever actually have a moment where you have free will and choice, it's in this moment. It's not in time. There's nothing you can do about the past. You actually can't do anything with your future. You have to either do it or not do it now. So in that very Yoda kind of way, it's like, it's not, try or try not. It's do or do not, really. Like, that's the only thing that's available. And
and in our awareness podcast, we talked about how you said there's two categories of where your awareness can be truly, which is like in thought or in experience. And so everything in the non-dualness that we're talking about lives inside the category of your attention is placed in the present, the awareness. You're not lost in that thinking arena.
So let's actually talk about duality for a second. So in a big sense, duality means two in some way. And then we start to see that in life, there's aspects that are full of duality. And so at a very basic level of, like, literally evolving and becoming animal, one of the very first signals for an animal is good, bad, right? Does this taste good? Does this taste bad? Does this feel good? Does this feel bad? Is this attractive or not attractive, right? That whole polarity of toward, away, good and bad. And so at some level, us believing good or bad is incredibly useful because it defines what we should eat or not eat, right? We
Right.
prefer shelter over the elements. So, we learn to build houses and do these things. This is the toward and away engine of almost all desire and progress, has this duality piece of it. Other things, though, split in a similar way. We could say that time is a bit like two things. We've got past and future, right? That when we sort of model out into time, and then I'll always talk about something very different than that, which is this moment, right? This
Right,
moment
right.
in a meaningful way. So we could say there's time and not time, like time and now, but even time breaks up into like past and future. So good and bad is this very basic kind of judgment or skill of duality that we're doing. But what I want to point out is that anybody who's really looked at this may realize that even though for us personally, it very much seems that there are real things that are good and bad, right? That I would judge as good or bad. Oftentimes from a different perspective or in a different context or in a different way, those good and bad things aren't as solid. Like what's good for me, the very same thing might be bad for you. So obviously, depending on who we're talking about, the thing isn't good or bad, it's relative. So a lot of this starts to come up, and as we mature and we actually get better at realizing good and bad, we can detach from our own absolute kind of judgment of good and bad and realize, oh, I'm actually doing a judgment move, right? My analytical thinking mind is what I'm putting on to the is-ness of reality to name things good and bad based on my preferences, my goals, what I think I want, etc. So as we're doing that, that is a very base level thing that in consciousness comes right online very unconsciously for us to just immediately start labeling things as I like that, I don't like that. That's good, that's bad. That's attractive, that's unattractive.
Well, and it can get influenced. Other people can influence that and
Totally.
create stories that perpetuate that. So yeah, that's happening a lot, all the time, almost in thinking at all. Would you say?
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so duality is that place of judging is-ness, right? If we can say that is-ness is just reality before you've interpreted it, right? So
Right.
just reality actually as it's happening is what we'll call is-ness. And then we actually take that is-ness and we judge it, right? So I call it the judgment muscle. We use a judgment muscle where we start separating things and placing them into categories and liking them and essentially just thinking about the world, right? As we're thinking about the world, that one of the base lenses that comes online is this dualistic lens of toward away, good, bad, I like it, I don't like it, etc. And so we could call that, while we're doing that heavily, living in duality, right? We're literally living in a dualistic world in that way. We've got lots of toward away, lots of preferences. So we don't want to throw that away. That's very human, very useful. But is there a place where we could actually get to something where we say, okay, what does non-dual look like? Like, what is non-duality? And just to back up, this is what a lot of spiritual teachers end up talking about. This is what a lot of historically people who have looked at the philosophy of life and have worked on things realize, oh, we get really attached to desiring good things and running away from bad things. And a lot of this is at the core of the human condition of like, what are we doing here, right? And so spiritually, non-duality is often lauded as like a very high spiritual place to get to, right? Well, to simplify that, and here's where I think we do it a good service of making it a little bit easier. It doesn't take 10 years on a seat cushion to permanently step into non-duality and escape duality. In fact, that would be what I call a mistake of nested duality, which we'll explain in a second, right? But all non-duality is moment by moment. It's a moment where you're experiencing is-ness and you have removed your judgment of whether that is good or bad. There's just a thing happening. So if you imagine noticing a sensation in your body, maybe like what your feet feel like right now, if you move your attention to that, there's an is-ness in your foot. That's just the experience of your foot being there. And watch how quickly it is that we can judge it as, well, that's boring, or I like that tingle. It actually feels good, or it feels bad, or whatever. Those are where we're stepping in and out of duality if we're putting down those labels of quality, of valence, of good or bad on something. And so I could pause there just to give that some space. But it's really important to start realizing how attached to good and bad we get, and how often lost in good and bad we are, and how much that drives us psychologically. Where when we're just lost in duality and there's no other option, that is not optimal on its own. And then just making non-duality good of, oh, I'm just in isness all the time, nothing means anything, this is just whatever, that by itself isn't good either. And so what we're actually trying to argue for is a wisdom of knowing how to use both, how to actually judge with care and put down judgment when it's meaningful to do that. So
yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, that was great. I felt very non-dual just being in the isness of listening to that explanation.
Okay, cool, good.
I mean, a lot of I think our concepts are kind of parallel concepts, meaning you can apply what we're saying about them across the board. So before, we've talked about how you can be lost in thought, like lost in duality, and then you can find presence, which is completely leaving thought, being in the isness, being in the now, which gives you agency to either stay out of thought or stay out, we'll replace thought with duality, or go back in and change the thought, or move your attention to a different thought. And you've also said thoughts and emotions, like emotion is a sensation and a meaning, right? So it's a thought about, it's a sensation. So going back to kind of this sense of kind of mastering being. So if you apply this idea that you can go into non-duality completely and then come back into the duality and apply it to the emotional side and not the thinking side, it allows you to be in an emotion like anxiety or overwhelm. Leave it completely, come to the presence, come to isness, and then go back, not into anxiety and overwhelm. If you want to, if that's motivating or somewhat helpful, go for it. Most people do not want to live like that. Change it, right? So go change that thought and then adjust that emotion into peace or joy or happiness or whatever that is. So I just didn't want people to get confused thinking that duality is happiness or joy, because I mean, it can be like a sense of that, or peace or something, but those are still dualistic words that we're putting on this kind of connection to consciousness, isness, or reality. So I just wanted to kind of tie that map, just like we did with thinking. You can leave it and then come back in and edit it into the feelings of the being that we say, hey Rob, I want to be happy, or I want to be fulfilled, right? This is still your access. It's still the access, and that leaving aspect and the coming back, right? That agency to kind of come and go as you want, whether it's thinking, not thinking, or duality, not duality. That's the fundamental shift. Like that's the power of kind of this tool that you've created, that we're giving to people.
Yeah, I mean, think of that as sort of, if anybody's heard of the concept of attachment, right? Like how attached to something are you, right? And you might think of that as almost like a thought compulsion, right? I can't accept something different than what I'm imagining things should be, right? I've got a certain way that this person's supposed to treat me, or I'm kind of obsessed with how people perceive me at work or whatever. And so it's just not okay if they were to think this other thing about me, right? That's a real attachment. And so what's happening there is we're modeling something, we're thinking something, we're making up things. We've got lenses that are altering like how important certain parts of it are to us. We've got reasons that are unconscious to us, meaning they're lost in the lens, right? We've got a really positive way we'd like it to be, but it's feeling negative because it's not that way. So we've got like a ton of duality, good and bad, going on there. And then to your point, what does it look like to leave that? It's literally just moment by moment putting down that modeling or the attachment to that, right? So the harder that I'm modeling that and like won't put it down, won't consider anything else, I would call that the degree that I'm attached to, to this urgent thing, this urgent idea that I have, this way of being. My kid couldn't possibly have a bad holiday coming up. Like, no, I have to get this toy, right? That's where we get really attached. And it's funny because you laugh at it when I do it, but like we watch people do that and so much more.
Oh, I'm laughing because I just do it all the time.
Right?
It's I catch myself doing it all the time. And often there are good reasons. I'm like, oh no, I can trace it back to this or that. But what was I? Oh, the other day, just like just thinking about like the different restrictions and coronavirus and and just how attached we are to these meanings of like what things are. And I think we talked about how Thanksgiving symbolizes eating, and Christmas symbolizes gathering. And I'm just like, I'm doing it myself. I'm like, is it Christmas without this? Because people have, especially, we'll say Christmas over Thanksgiving, this very, like, we can talk about tradition. This is kind of an offshoot. I'm going on a tangent, but we can talk about tradition and attachment or whatever, because that's, to me, a tradition is both definitely a behavior, an action, an outcome, but it's that feeling, that sentiment of like, it's holidays and the smells and like that, all that brings up for people. And so that's like, if you want to get an illustration of what we're talking about with that, having that capacity of being to kind of enjoy the doing, like that holidays to me is perfect. It's like no one wants to just like rush around and go shopping, but they like that feeling of like, the smell of the air and the Christmas music on and the pumpkin spice latte or whatever that is. But it's just, we have this attachment to like, if it's not the one thing, like we'll say, if it's not a Christmas holiday how it's always been, it won't feel like Christmas. And like I do that, like I've thought this in my head, like, oh, I'm not going to see my family this year, and I'm not going to do this, and it's not, this is different this year. Is that really Christmas? And it's I'm doing that was my laugh. And so I think we all do this in ways that don't always make sense. When we think about that, what is that meaning? Of course, Christmas is a day on the calendar. Like if everybody decided, July 1st was Christmas and we all did the Christmas things on July 1st, eventually that would become Christmas. Like these things are editable, but they don't feel editable to us.
Not once we're attached. We don't have much freedom once we've gotten locked on. So the consciousness part of this, the becoming more conscious, is to start having things that are happening unconsciously to you, like being lost in duality, lost in this judgmental world of that's good, that's bad. Are you even capable of putting that down and literally just being with what is? We talk about this. This loops back to how we describe suffering, right? Suffering is resisting what is. So that's this exact same story of like, I get super attached to some idea. The is-ness is different than my idea. The degree that I am struggling to not accept is-ness and insist on my idea in the face of the world being very different, that's the degree to me struggling, right? And suffering. Like that is exactly the degree of your suffering. If you're not resisting that much, it's much less suffering. If you're resisting a ton, it's tons of suffering. And so if suffering were the only game, it would be obvious that we'd probably never want to suffer. Like, why would we do that at all? But then there's some people who are like, well, if I suffer a little, that'll make me behave in a way to maybe force my outcome. And that's a way that I create or whatever. I'm down for that. That's fine. Like if you're consciously doing that and this is something where you would like to resist the is-ness to build something, you want to go Elon Musk a rocket or something, like go, like, please do that. We need that. So this is not about like, okay, let's just not suffer only, but we want to do all of these things with wisdom. We don't want to be unconscious in how we're kind of lost to our attachments and our duality, etc. So let's say what happens here. If all of a sudden you can see that stepping out of duality, which immediately takes us out of time and it takes us out of good and bad. Okay, so I'm not thinking anymore. I'm moving into experience of is-ness, without a model or a judgment of, is it good or bad? Do I like it? Do I not like it? Just being with what is. Well, immediately suffering goes away. Immediately time goes away. I'm just in this moment. And I'm just in the sensation or the view or the experience of the music or whatever's happening in the moment. And I'm just with that, right? Now, as soon as people see that that ends suffering, there's a whole lot of spiritual people that go, oh my gosh, non-duality is the jammy jam. Now I'm present. This feels amazing. This is really good. Now watch what's required for that though. We have to actually leave non-duality to have an opinion about non-duality again. We have to actually go, I like this. This is good, right? This whole no time presence thing is good. Do you see how subtle and quick that move is? Like back into duality about non-duality. Right. And now we're going to say that non-duality is the best thing in the world. We all should just do this. Let's not be judgmental jerks, right? Let's lose that, judgmental mind and be more open-minded, less judgmental. And what we've done is we've actually put non-duality and made it good And we've left duality as this bad thing, which if you look at it is just nesting duality. That's all that is. We've now just made an error. So rather than leaving them as truly two important spaces that we should have mastery of both, right, to transcend and include duality, we've actually said, okay, duality is bad, we should just be non-dual. And that is a huge spiritual mistake, right? That is like an enormous mistake that in lots of lines of religion and lots of spiritual teachers make that error where they're going, oh, just be non-dual, that's the win. When in reality, we need to use duality and judgment well, and we need to be able to put that down and live in non-duality well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, highlighting the spiritual mistake of that is that it's not that there's a mistake with spirituality. It's that is actually, that idea is taking you out of what spirituality presencing is. And I think it's both funny and to me, and also very profound to me, that like to even look at duality, right, or non-duality, then you have to to look at non-duality as good, you have to come back into duality to put that label on. And it's also like what was popping into my head is that we often associate wisdom as like to know if something's quote bad or good. And or I should say, I think of wisdom as the ability to know if something's bad or good for me, for the context or whatever.
Sure.
Better, worse, bad or good, good or evil, whatever words you want to put on, very dualistic words to put on that. And the wisdom that I think that we're talking about today is there's no place for bad or good in that wisdom, because it's saying the wisdom is the transcend and include. It's to know that you are always able to access this non-dual sense. And then so you're transcending this good or bad, but then also how do you include, bring good or bad, bring duality back into it. And not saying that in itself is good or bad, right? So wisdom then to me has always been, is this good or bad, gets thrown into the trash, because it's not about, is this thing good or bad or not? It's, do I want to be in duality or non-duality? And can I keep myself from nesting it, where I start to say, oh, suffering, is bad and whatever. And it's this suffering. I mean, many people suffer and it doesn't ruin them. It doesn't destroy them. So again, there's nuances in this meaning of suffering, right? Because of course someone might say, well, of course suffering's bad. Like, what value does suffering have? And to your point about, turning the dials, what we're doing here is giving you agency to have more options. So to your point, if there's a little thing where you're like, suffer, let's say you go work out and you lift, you're like, oh, my arms are so tired, right? That's suffering, right? That's bad. We don't normally want to feel pain in our muscles, but like really we're doing that for a purpose, so they can like break down and rebuild. And that's like weightlifting, right? So there is a place for this, like, even words like wisdom, we think let's just say blanket attach good, suffering, let's blanket attach bad. Like we can have all these words and all these meanings, general agreed upon meanings, and we can take away the good or bad of it and then just look at it in a new way. So I'm just kind of, I guess, live in this recording with you right now, realizing that my definition of wisdom as knowing if something's good or bad is really not the kind of wisdom that I want to be having. I want the kind of wisdom that's knowing when the access to good or bad makes sense in the realm of non-duality.
So let me like, so that's awesome. And let's not like throw away duality in any way, right? So
of course, yeah.
So I think that wisdom, and it's really interesting, like, what is wisdom? I mean, wisdom, I think a lot of people would equate that with like knowledge. Like once you know something, you're wise, etc. And okay, like knowledge could maybe add to wisdom, but wisdom is also effective when you don't know the answer. It's like, that's what wisdom is. It's like you made a wise choice. You didn't really know the answer and you made a wise choice. So it's not totally knowledge dependent. Wisdom, good and bad, is a big part of wisdom, right? Like when you are online and you are judging and you're a good human being who's living in time, who's doing all the stuff that regular old humans do, I hope you make better choices with your good and bad judgment detector, right? Like, can you realize when you're overly attached to something that you think is really good and that's going to be the final answer? Maybe that should be turned down. And you're over worried about something that's bad, and you go, oh, actually, that's not that scary. I could totally endure that, right? So like all of these are wisdom moves. To your point, it's more about getting these dials down and this maturity and wisdom skill, if you will, to know where we can turn off the judgment and then come back and rejudge it, or really drop the judgment and leave it off, or say, hey, that is important. I got to stick with that judgment and really go with it. And that's literally like moment by moment coming in and out of duality. What I'm hard arguing against is just remaining unconscious, being lost in duality and having no sense that you're even doing this judging. What that usually feels like is just you're taking it as, this is real. I'm right. If I think this is good or bad, like I'm absolutely right. And part of this wisdom is actually pulling in, maybe I don't know everything that I know, right? It's this wonderful little skeptical doubt about the permanence of any of your judgments and assessments. And it's really weird. I think that when you help us bring this back, and you don't have to do it in this moment, I don't know if you could, but I end up often talking so abstract and about these different rules, and it really helps with examples, I think. So like we should probably make a conscious effort to try to tie this back to specific examples so people can see how simply what we're talking about is, because it feels very vague when it's
right.
But it is a wisdom move to realize that you can put down the judgment muscle, which is all that it is to step into non-duality about something. Just not be judging the quality of it in the moment. Just be with what is. And then you can bring back on, hopefully with wisdom, a different sense of judgment, or the same judgment if that's important, or whatever. But you just have more freedom to rethink things.
Yeah. And I mean, at least I'll just speak for myself. I'm the type of person that I would feel a lot of pressure if I had to point at every single meaning thing, right? And say that's good or that's bad, right? Like we need shades of gray to kind of coexist, because of the, like we've talked about, the complexity of our time, like that we're not cavemen, and there's not like a couple of us.
Mm-hmm.
There's people and things and technology, and we're everywhere. And so even more so, I think, I've always said my favorite thing about getting older or being older is that I realize with every passing year how much I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember kind of the burden of being younger, like late teens, early 20s, and feeling like I either knew everything already, or I was behind because I didn't know what it was yet, and I was dying to experience it, which I think is probably a common feeling for people kind of coming of age. And now that I am out of my 20s, I can kind of sit back and be like, I really don't know. And if I did know, it's probably different than whatever my last assumption about it is. And that, like, if we're talking about this kind of emotional benefit or mastery over being, it allows me to be like so much better than I was, because I'm more authentic. I feel less angsty. I feel less stressed. I feel less behind. I feel less like, and I'm just full. I'm full of like wonder and curiosity and appreciation and gratitude, which I don't think I could feel when I was feeling like I had to know everything, and everything had to be good or bad, and I had to make these decisions, and this is what I was going to do with my life, this is where I was going to live, and this is like, all that kind of pressure that we get as we like kind of come into ourselves. And so I don't know, that was maybe just a long tangent into something.
It's really helpful. I really love it. There's this, I want to kind of highlight why we attack beliefs so often. And I always try to say, I don't just mean religious beliefs. I'm not attacking your faith or anything like that. I'm talking about a kind of belief that is what I talk about psychologically is just an assuredness of meaning. Okay. So if we are positive that the meaning that we're making up is right, I would say that we are believing our meaning making in that moment. So whatever model you have going on in your mind, if you're positive that you're right, you might be, right? Your belief could be accurate, but I would say that assuredness is the degree to your belief muscle in that moment. Now, I have said, and anybody could quiz me on this because I'm going to use absolute language or whatever, but at least in my effort, I try not to believe anything, right? I try to make meaning that is useful to me, but I'm very aware that my perspective is partial, my knowledge is partial, my skill of memory is partial, like all of the things, right? So I literally come to every single moment. This doesn't make it weird, like, oh my gosh, I can't make any decisions, I can't do anything. But I'm not attached in, if somebody said, oh, this is going on or whatever, it might sound ridiculous. And I would go, well, that doesn't really follow. So I'm not going to just believe nonsense either. But if there's some plausible thing that they're putting up, I'm not attached and then like arguing for my truth and my truth is the only truth. So again, this is very vague. People might not understand what I'm saying, but it's in that assuredness of meaning that we get stuck, that we get heartbroken, that we're so sure we're behind or we don't know enough or whatever.
You say it's the reason we go to war and kill each other. You know what I mean?
It's exactly the reason we go to war and kill each other. It's the whole reason. So if I know that my political party is right, and it's always right and whatever, that is a way more slammed down into delusion position than one that is open to say, hey, this is my preference, but I'm open to look at what might be wrong here and I'm open to hear what the other side's about. Like that's a way more potentially cooperative way to get along in the world. And this just applies to literally everything. So part of this duality versus non-duality has this other degree of like, how much are you believing the judgments and the duality that you're in? How fixated on that are you? And sadly, most humans who haven't worked with their mind at all are just lost in a full assuredness of meaning all the time. They're believing what they're thinking almost constantly as I'm right. This is this is why somebody will argue so hard for something that seems so kind of off the wall. It's because they're believing it. They're believing their perspective and their thought process, and they're just assured that they're right. That is generally, if we're going to judge it, right, that's going to be a less fluid, less capable way of being. And we want to learn how to put that down. Stepping into non-duality is the first step at loosening that grip on factual, judgment mindset, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point to bring up. And I think if we look at this topic in kind of in the context of fundamental shift, identity shifting, and societal shifting, which is where what we're building this training around and what we're talking about here. I think that we live in a society that is judgmental more now than ever before. And I don't mean that like necessarily outright people are judgmental of me. Like when I say so-and-so judged me, that's occurring as well. But there's just a lot of messaging. There's a lot of, political splintering and just economical stuff and climate stuff. And we all even just within our, the United States, we're seeing how not united we are as a collection of states for various reasons, right? So just because of the complexity, right? We live in a time where if judgment is a survival instinct and we're trying to figure out how to kind of navigate the complexity of life by judging different things, we're doing it all the time, which is being perpetuated all the time, which is also in our messaging, in our market. It's how people market and advertise and how your friends behave and how you interact with your family. It's everywhere, which is why we had a whole episode on awareness and attention. And in that episode, we were kind of like, I hope you believe us that this is like foundational to everything and it's so important. But as we get into kind of these additional concepts around this work, I'll keep pointing back to like, that's why your attention matters. Because if you can't move out of the judgment, which we might need for this surviving in the complexity of human beings, and you're not aware of where your attention is, you're not going to win at this, what we're talking about today in this episode. Right. You won't, because it starts with that ability to notice where your attention is and to move it around, which is why, just to keep pointing back at the fundamental shift. That's why this move is the fundamental shift for everything else. Because if you can notice where your attention is, stop it and move it, then you will win at this kind of other stuff, the judgment, the suffering, the doing, like the spirituality aspect, the all of it. And if you can't, I mean, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, yeah. And I that's, thanks for that uplifting message, but I want to echo it. I mean, it really is that this is the game that we have to get good at. It has so many positives when you do get good at it, when it immediately makes you go, oh, I see where I was stuck. I see where everybody else is stuck. Like, this is it is the universal kind of move. And I love how you brought up all three sort of stages of this. That fundamental shift is literally the capacity to put down time, judgment, and self into present non-dual is-ness. Actually, in some way, if we were to make that a little mini belt system, like, getting better at that is really falling in love with and seeing how useful that is across all these other wonderful things. But what that comes with is, at some point, that turns into identity shifting, which is, from the basis of that skill, now you can come back on and manufacture different feelings, behaviors, and sense of self and modeling of the world that's very different. So the psychological you that comes online is deeply different and capable of different ongoingly, right? So that this is the skill of real accomplishing over time, real self-mastery, etc. So fundamental shift, then changing who you are, how you feel, and how you behave over time. And then through that, when more of us get that together, we'll build societies that are markedly different than they are today. Markedly, I think, higher functioning and capable of incredible things by comparison to, we're doing pretty incredible things already. And I think when you add this capability, we'll be able to deeply change society in enormous ways, which is really exciting.
I mean, we have to figure out collectively how to transcend and include, because if we, like we were saying, I would never advocate for sitting on a rock all day and leaving good or bad. Like, I do think it's useful. However, if we cannot bend or see other perspectives or see shades of gray, or easily, both hold non-duality and hold parts of duality, and also realize that somebody else coming from a different spot, we're gonna either burn up or kill each other, or viruses will run rampant. Like, this is a society, kind of a societal move that can change the game for I think, all of humans. I know you think this too. That's why we're doing the work. And it's again, another way that it's just a gift that keeps on giving, is it starts with fixing all the stuff that you yourself want, right? And then giving you the feelings to appreciate them, and then giving you the access to be able to relate out to the world that's not maybe had this experience that you've had. But then also, kind of what I hope we're doing over our podcast is kind of giving you, if you already get this or get this to a sense, I hope we're giving you the tools and the words and the stories and the analogies and the examples to kind of help relate this to other people. Because part of what our rebranding effort is Rob was talking about, how he really likes helping people and helping, the coach, giving people the coaching programs. But like, the bigger game here is that we need to be able to shift society so we can succeed as a species, and that this is so foundational to that. And so I do want to encourage people, if you're like, I like this and I get this, like, hopefully this then gives you the vocabulary to relate it to other people, and it kind of highlights, oh, I see that person seems like they're stuck in their attachment, or I see that person maybe can't leave their thinking, or I see that person is like so meditative and they don't know why they aren't doing right. Like, we're just trying to, at least one of the benefits that I've gotten from working alongside Rob and helping and being employed here at the Fundamental Shift, is that it's given me vocabulary for the things that I've kind of already known, and allowed me to kind of talk about it across with other people. Because there's one sense we all want that self-mastery, but then as soon as we get that self-mastery, it's how can we give that back into kind of this universal consciousness and this bigger cause than ourselves. So I'm sure we'll keep talking about that in a different episode.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing too is that if this if some of these things, and I always can imagine in duality, judging this, we could always do better, right? So like there's like we want to give you the most effective tools, and we're coming in, just kind of talking about this as we get the free training finished up and available. My big vision for that is if you like this, that it's not on you to explain this to other people. It's just go point them at the free training too. And then as we're using new words like non-dual or judgment or belief and attachment and these things, as more people in your life that matter to you also understand those concepts, it helps everybody just navigate consciousness, navigate meaning making, navigate the world differently, right? So as more of us understand these mechanisms and what we're trying to describe as far as what's possible for your own consciousness, your own thinking, your own meaning making, your own behavior, etc., just share it, get other people to listen to, especially when you think they're suffering or having difficulty, because maybe it helps them, but it also helps us all sort of have this shared wisdom that we can all lean on and understand. And as we do that, that's truly what's going to help shape society differently.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I love this conversation. I always love kind of looking at the more spiritual and being side of this work. But this conversation I really liked because I think it just brought in more vocabulary for everyone to kind of talk about this in all its goodness, because it really is. I was thinking about, I was kind of laughing. One of both, I think our favorite clients in a coaching call the other day kind of got this concept of accessing presence, and she was pumped, and it was awesome because it was this big breakthrough, and it made me so excited for her because it was like, maybe not step one, but an early step down something that was going to keep giving her an awesome experience and enhancing the things that she wanted to enhance. And I was like, man, if you thought that was great, keep on going, because it's just going to get better. And so I will also say that to our listeners. I mean, if you like what you've heard, keep listening, because I think Rob and I are also really excited just to keep unfolding this for you in all the ways that we can. And it's pretty endless because it is the foundation for everything. So.
Well, it's the foundation for how we're making meaning and the whole thing. And we're going to get up into doing, into feeling differently, into doing, into changing society. Like, we have plans to talk about all that stuff. For today, I hope that you get the duality in the way that we're talking about it is essentially when you're coming online into a judgment place, and you're making all kinds of assessments of what you like, what you don't like, what's good, what's bad. Non-duality is just literally moving your attention away from that modeling and that plus minus kind of game into just a being with what is in this moment, and loosening your grip on some of those judgments so that you can come back and be in and out of duality meaningfully, into non-duality, into duality, and back and forth really well. So play with that. Hopefully that's helpful. Things like back to breath and just moving your attention around are totally related and foundational to that as well. So hopefully if you stack these talks up together, they'll really lead to something that can be life-changing for you. So that's our intention anyway. So,
yeah, definitely.
Anyway, so good stuff. Thanks for this today. This is amazing. I hope everybody has a wonderful end of year here coming up, holidays for everybody, and into the new year. We're really excited to be back here talking with you. So be kind to yourself and everybody else. We'll talk to you really soon. Bye-bye.